Well, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today was the big news, which is Nerf Day. Game Balance Manifesto was revealed, and this contains a fair bit of detail, not absolute detail, on a number of the major balance changes that are happening. The very short summary, though, is that some of the best ascendancies currently in the game are getting modest nerfs, Elementalists may be a bit more severe, and that across the board there's pretty significant reductions in character damage, but this is tuned in such a way that it is mostly going to hit highest end scaling. So people who have been at the highest end of character performance will take a larger percentage nerf than characters who were sort of off meta and weaker. But let's go through this. I'm not going to discuss every single line here because it's just too big a document to do that in. So what we're going to do is have a look at a summary that I've made, and we'll have a look in a bit more detail of some of the things. So firstly, support gems nerfed across the board, and this is the section that is termed the Great Support Gem Reduction. I do recommend reading this document in its entirety as well, and I will put a link to it, but let's go through the broad strokes overview of it. It's my belief that current 6 links will be decreasing in performance to approximately 5.25 links worth of power. 5 links to approximately 4.5. And this means that Tabula Rasa is probably no longer going to be something that people actively farm early on. I think people will instead use a 5-link chest that has mods on it, rather than using a 6-link that has none, i.e. Tabula. That said, Tabula will still have some uses, and it's still obviously something that's very easy to use. I just don't think that it will be nearly as hegemonic in the standard softcore trade enabled meta. So there's a number of other changes that are being made in here, but most notably traps are broadly speaking not getting changed much at all. Now there's a number of skills that are getting damage increased, especially melee skills, but there's also a change to a couple of support gems and support skills. So Seismic Cry being one of these. Seismic Cry is gone. So slam builds have been exploiting how powerful Seismic Cry was really since the overhaul of slam skills, and Seismic Cry is dead as a skill, and this means that the existing slam builds, all of them cease working, but new slam builds I'm confident will be found, because the slams are still looking pretty good, and Earthbreaker support looks a lot better as a result, because Earthbreaker support is not affected by these by the nerfs that are happening here. So there's some changes happening to awakened support gems that we'll come to in a sec as well. And those are basically getting their quality nerfed considerably. A lot of awakened support gems function at their 20 quality is like 40 quality would be on a normal gem. And a lot of the awakened support gems are basically like a level 25, 26, 27 version of the normal skill gem. So a lot of those are going to get their quality effects nerfed so that they remain the same as the normal skill gem, and their sort of top end scaling from quality. So a lot of them had 20 quality bonuses that were significant. A lot of those are getting rolled into gem level 5 effects. So that's something that's going to be happening there as well. Now, the next thing that needs to be said is Archmage. Archmage was so powerful that I'm not sure this nerf will kill it. But let's have a look at this nerf. This is a big one. So Archmage is having its supported skills have base mana cost equal to 5% of your own reserve maximum mana instead of 6%. That's not really intended as either a buff or a nerf. That's just a change, and that's because some of the other support gems have had their numbers nerfed. The way the nerf has taken place has been by an increase of their mana multiplier. But supported skills gain added lightning damage equal to 60% of mana cost if mana cost is not higher than the maximum you could spend. This used to be 108%. So this is a 45% reduction in, it's just basically a 45% less multiplier to Archmage's build total damage. But I'm not sure that that's all that impactful, because Archmage was so powerful that it may just not be enough to have any real impact. We'll have to see on that. There's going to be a lot of theory crafting undoubtedly going on there that we will see the results of over time. So, Archmage is also having some other changes made to it indirectly, so we will have a look into that at a later point. So those are changes that are not happening to Archmage support, but to other things. So yeah, I think Archmage was is savagely nerfed, but was so strong that it's probably still okay. Additionally, there's a few changes to support gem to quality on support gems. So Chain, for instance, is being broadly speaking improved by having its quality changed from projectile speed to chaining range. These don't seem intended as strengthening the skills or weakening them, more just changing them up a little bit. At least that's my understanding. Flasks are their own entity, huge changes, almost all of them are nerfs. This was sort of discussed a bit in my sort of first thoughts, but basically the unique flasks are getting transformed. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens with them. Coruscating Elixir is a flask that everyone forgets exists because it doesn't drop in normal gameplay. It only comes from a divination card, and most loot filters hide the div card because in a trade league it's just not worth very much. The Coruscating Elixir is an example of a flask that could be quite interesting after these changes. So the duration on it is staggeringly long. So Ruby flasks, Topaz flasks, and Sapphire flasks have been buffed baseline in order to have a longer duration and less cost to use. So less flask charges being used. So they're better than they were. We'll have to see how that turns out. I still don't think those flasks are going to be worth using by default. But with the flask slot being individually less powerful, we'll have to see. Unique flasks, though, that provide flat damage and serious defensive buffs are all getting nerfed. So that's going to be a pretty big deal. Also, there's flask effect duration on the passive tree now, as well as a couple of other new clusters that are being added. And enduring mana flasks are being changed. Enduring mana flasks are being part of the nerfs that are being targeted at Archmage builds and big mana builds. Enduring mana flasks are no longer going to provide the same amount of mana recovery per second. What they're going to do instead is work for a longer duration, but at a lower amount of mana per second. Now there's a head scratcher. I do not see why this nerf is happening, but it is, and it's going to basically remove one of the mods that we all used on flasks. The adrenaline modifier on flasks now gives far less movement speed. So it's going from up to 30% down to 8%. And this is going to mean that basically there is no real justification for using that mod, I think, anymore. So basically you're going to look for something else on your Quicksilver flasks, not adrenaline. You will definitely still be using Quicksilver flasks. Additionally, the Iron Skin and Reflexes suffixes have been nerfed pretty hard. They now grant 40 to 60% armor or evasion, down from 60 to 100%. And this is all part of the same idea of reducing the power of all flasks across the board. I do believe you can then scale that up, though, with one of the new orbs. I think it's the Enkindling Orb that is the one that grants a flask modifier that increases the effect. So maybe you will find that there's ways to make them still work. Okay, next up we have the changes that are being made to... next thing we have the changes being made to ailments. And ailment mitigations are significant changes here. Elementalist and Inquisitor lose the ailment mitigations entirely. Raider got nerfed but not gutted. And Hierophant got nerfed but not gutted here. Now for the Raider, it's easy enough to fix this up by taking the Crystal Skin cluster early on, and then later on swapping to gear with ailment mitigation, at which point you unspec the Crystal Skin cluster and take something else that's better. But for Hierophants, that's not really a choice. Crystal Skin is on the other end of the tree, and so you have to do without immunity, just with 50% avoidance, until endgame when gear comes online and fills those gaps. So I think that what this really means is that the Hierophant has taken a nerf in hardcore environments, but in softcore it's not going to matter very much. You'll just have one or two unfortunate deaths before you get geared, but once you're geared, it's not going to matter. There are some changes to the Pantheon that affect Corrupted Blood and Curses, but the big thing that I noticed on this is that, well, two big things. Firstly, the Atziri's Reflection shield is going to be much better in 3.15 than it's been before. That's not because the Atziri's shield is getting changed in any way. It's just that it's going to be harder to get curse immunity via other means, and curses are going to be more impactful. Next, maps that have the curse players are affected by vulnerability with X% increased effect. These are going to be terrifying. This is going to go from a mod that no one really cares about at the moment. either because you've got a warding flask always active, or you've got a anti-bleed flask ready for and possibly always active. That is going to change. You're not going to have permanent immunity to curses and bleed, and that's going to mean that maps with vulnerability, you're going to have to play them very carefully. And I think that hardcore players will regard that as being as scary a mod now as something like monsters have increased critical strike chance and critical strike multiplier, or monsters have increased power charges or things like that. It's going to be a really sketchy mod there. In softcore, it's not going to matter as much, but it will still be impactful. So there's a number of changes happening to poison. Essentially, the idea that they seem to be going with here is, at least from what I can tell, is raise the level of non-assassin poison builds up to something a bit lower than the assassin currently is, and bring the assassin down to that level. So currently, if you wanted to play a poison build, you kind of had to be an assassin, and you kind of had to use Corralito's signature. They are gutting Corralito's signature to the extent that, like, all that this flask is good for is just for throwing it at an enemy with the new flask skill. And you can't even do that in game. Like, you just imagine that you're doing that. Imagine that you're throwing it, and then, whereas with explosive concoction, you don't actually throw away your flasks. You sort of still keep the flask. In this case, just imagine that you're throwing Corralito's signature at the enemy. The other thing that you'll notice here is that there has been a massive nerf to diamond flasks, which we'll get to in a second. So, the Assassin's Poison notable passives have been nerfed pretty hard. Noxious Strike has been really, really toned down from so good that every poison build has to take it to so good that you still take it if you're an assassin, but you can play a build that's not an assassin with it. And Toxic Delivery has been downgraded as well. But the key thing is that Poison inherently deals 50% more damage. I think that might actually make Poison, broadly speaking, more attractive on other builds. So I'm keen to see how this plays out. So Corralito's signature. Firstly, the Diamond Flask has changed from critical strikes are lucky to 100% increased global critical strike chance. So 100% increased global critical strike chance. What that means is that if your skill has a base crit of 7%, and you've scaled that up to 28% through other means, then you go from 28 to 35%. The old version of a Diamond Flask was miles better than this. Like, so much better that it's out of sight. And that this is a tremendous, tremendous nerf to Diamond Flasks in general, but particularly Corralito's signature in specifically. Like, I just can't imagine anyone using this. It no longer grants Perfect Agony. It just grants 30% damage over time multiplier for poison. Doesn't grant any duration. I cannot see any reason to use this unless you are desperate to get 25% chance to poison on hit during Flask effect. So Corralito's signature is dead. Anyways, Pathfinder's Master Toxicist has had a small nerf. That is pretty small, but it is there. It still has its poison spread mechanic, which is the main reason people use it. But the chance to deal double damage with poisons, which was significant, it was a compelling reason to take the node. It's just had its chance to proc reduced. Overall result is that poison builds should feel far better earlier on and now allow for a wider selection of viable ascendancy choices, such as the Occultist. This part I agree with, and this I think is going to be a significant build diversification effect. You'll be able to play an Occultist as poison, but you could even play something like a Raider if you wanted to. Poison builds were also guilty of having a particularly uninteresting array of support gems, with most providing an unconditional more damage multiplier. And here there's an interesting thing. We have reworked the poison support gem to now be called Critical Strike Affliction Support. This support gem provides damage over time multiplier to damaging ailments from critical strikes, so it can also be used with ignites and bleeds too. I really want to see this one in practice, but I do think that's probably a good idea because poison support was, like, you used it if the numbers said to use it. It wasn't like it was doing anything interesting. And so we'll see where that one goes. Note this change affects all monsters as well, and that's talking about the 50% inherently more damage, but El Hesman has been nerfed to compensate this. So monsters that are not El Hesman that poison, and particularly the map mod Monsters Poison on Hit, will be a bit more impactful than it has been, but El Hesman should remain about the same. Ailment thresholds. So there have been a number of changes. Essentially, this whole section is about buffs to Chill and Shock, and also to Brittle, Sap, and whatever the other one's called, Scorch. All of those ailments have been buffed for player use here, but it's mostly to compensate the effect of the damage reductions before. So the other thing that I'm really excited by is this change here, this quality of life change, where you can see that this is a 50% shock that's affecting the player. This is an 11% shock that's affecting Suncall or Asher. This is a really useful quality of life change, and it's one of those things that I'm really happy to see there. So I think that overall this ailment threshold section is a minor power buff to characters and a massive quality of life change. Trigger effect costs. So they're changing skills that are triggered by other effects, so things like cast on critical strike. They are now going to cost mana. We do not have hard numbers on this yet, and that is going to be everything. We know that the unique mace Mjolnir is not going to be affected by this, and neither is the support gem Cast on Death. Now, Cast on Death is meme build only, but Mjolnir is something that might actually start seeing use again if all of the other alternatives to triggering spells have been nerfed, but Mjolnir has not. So that's going to be interesting to see. Cast when damage taken is getting considerable mana cost increases, and I think that's going to be impactful on builds that were triggering 2 or 3 or more skills with it. And depending on exactly how they work it, if that mana cost multiplier decreases as you level up the gem cast when damage taken, it might totally shake up the cast when damage taken meta. We'll have to see. What I fundamentally think is going to happen here is that builds that trigger a lot of skills are going to go from reserving 90 to 100% of their mana as they do now. They're going to have to sacrifice an aura. That's just going to be the way it's going to work. You're going to have to keep 30-40% of your mana unreserved, most likely, and that's going to be paid for triggered spells. We'll have to find out exactly how it plays in practice, but I would not league start Cast on Critical Strike build at the moment. You'll just have to wait and see what it ends up doing. Flame Dash, Dash, and Smoke Mine. Okay, so was it just me that always thought that Dash was terrible? So Flame Dash isn't becoming Lame Dash. Flame Dash is getting nerfed, but it should still be pretty good. Dash is terrible. I think it's terrible on 3.14 as well. I know some people like it, but they're not me. And it's getting worse than it is now. Smoke Mine is going to lose its utility as a move fast skill, and it's just going to be a gap traverser and an escape tool. It's no longer going to be a global move skill. I think if you tactically use Smoke Mine and you use it less than 3 times a map, you'll probably find it remains every bit as good as it is now. On the flip side, if you use Smoke Mine 10 plus times a map, like every speedrunner through the campaign does, you're going to find it much worse. I never really got into Smoke Mine just because it was such an uncomfortable playstyle. You were just pressing so many buttons. It was really, really painful on your hands after a day's play, so I didn't really use it that much. But I think it'll be interesting to see what it feels like now. Second Wind is dead. Second Wind support has just basically been deleted from the game. There is still going to be a gem that is called Second Wind support, but it's going to have no real use, I think, except maybe some extreme niche use, like you want to increase the mana cost of a skill a lot for purposes of Arcane Surge or something like that. It's lost all utility with Warcries. It's lost most of its utility with movement skills, and yeah, I just don't think it's very good. Now, there's some changes coming up next to Arcane Surge. Arcane Surge now has lost its ability to replenish a percentage of your maximum mana. This is a severe nerf to big mana builds, Archmage type builds, and I think that it's going to be much more difficult to run Mind Over Matter effectively. So Mind Over Matter, any build that has 6,000 or more mana at endgame is going to really feel this change. It will still provide some mana recovery, but it will work better with Clarity, but it will just not be nearly as powerful as it is now on big mana. Fortify effect is going to be harder to massively invest in Fortify, so you'll be able to get it, you just won't be able to scale it as high. Damage over time multiplier. This is interesting here. So there's some buffs and there's some nerfs that are taking place simultaneously here. What their core design goal is, I think they want to keep damage over time multiplier at roughly its current overall power level on builds that can use it. So this is things like Ignite builds, but they want to change it so that it's more about the gear you have equipped and less about the cluster jewels you are using. So cluster jewels that provide damage over time multiplier are being nerfed, and these nerfs are pretty significant. Essentially, the 6-socket approach to medium cluster jewels for damage over time multiplier is gone. You no longer want to roll these to have powerful or potent on them. In other words, to scale up the 4% damage over time multiplier to 5%, and then take every single one of those nodes, which was a viable choice. It is no longer a viable choice because those nodes are going to just provide generic fire damage instead, not fire damage over time multiplier. However, at the same time, they're making it considerably easier to roll damage over time multiplier on weapons. What they mean by this is that currently they're going to remain pretty rare mods, but they're going to be suffixes instead of prefixes. Now, while they're prefixes, they compete with a lot of more important mods. So at the moment, you can see this hypnotic knell void scepter. I was about to say hypnotic smell, but you can see how it's got the mod. I think it's runic, might be runic or glyphic, 101% increased spell damage. It's then got 33% fire dot multi, and then it's got +1 to the level of all spells and +1 to the level of all fire spells. This is an extraordinarily good scepter, even though it has 2 dead mods. The 7% fire damage is a bad roll, and the 1 mana gained on kill is a total dead mod. But currently, on the live servers, this would be 4 prefixes. So this first mod is a prefix, the second mod's a prefix, this is a suffix, this is a prefix, this is a prefix, this is a suffix. They're changing the dot multi to be a suffix. This is going to be really significant because what you can do at endgame is craft on +1 to the level of all spell skill gems and fire spell skill gems. There's a number of ways to do that craft. It's not an easy craft, but you can get both of them, or you can find them together on an item or trade for them together. Then you can use various harvest reforge suffixes, or reforge with a fire mod, but with the prefixes unable to change. Use these combinations to force on fire damage over time multiplier. I think that's how this has been crafted. Well, I think this is, you're not going to get quite this good, but let's say that this was 41% increased spell damage instead of 101%, because you won't get that mod with Magisters. But if you had 71%, that would then be something you could plausibly craft on maybe a 15 Exalt budget under the new system, whereas right now in 3.14 this would be impossible to craft. So what do I think this means? Firstly, for attack-based ailment builds. Attack-based ailment builds have a few mods that they do care about on their suffixes, so it's less of a buff there. For spellcaster-based ailment builds, it is more significant. But I think this will make up for most of the change that's being made with the dot multi cluster jewels overall. Veiled mods. Firstly, a couple of specific veiled mod combinations are being addressed. So you can no longer force multiple veiled mods onto items via various means that we're able to do that. But the big change is the changes that are happening to Ashling's crafting bench. Ashling's crafting bench is being nerfed, but it's not the smashing nerf that people are claiming it is on Reddit. I want to start by saying that Ashling's crafting bench will still be the single most powerful reward in the Betrayal system. More powerful than Varici's 1 to 6 white sockets, more powerful than the upgrading a Breachstone. However, it will no longer be something you just want to use on every item. So, Ashling's crafting bench mod that adds a veiled modifier now first hits the item with an annul. So it's much riskier to use it as a later step of item crafting than being an obvious final step because of its consistent mod pool. What does this mean in practice? Okay, so it means that for those of you that are familiar with the Warlord crafting method for creating endgame, reasonably good endgame physical damage weapons, and when I say reasonably good, I mean far better than you can get through most other means. The Warlord method you're probably going to use one of the 1 Exalt cost bench crafts instead of using an Ashling Slam at the end step of that. And then that means that you're not going to be able to have as much control over crafting both critical strike chance and critical strike multiplier. However, that method will still work. You will still be able to quite deterministically craft powerful physical damage weapons. Where you will use Ashling's bench crafts is when you have an item that has 2 excellent prefixes and 1 bad one. You will then use various methods with metamods to scour off all the suffixes. You can do that deterministically, just by prefixes can't be changed, and then applying a scouring orb. And then you will use Ashling's Veiled Benchcraft on that, and you'll have a reasonable chance of getting rid of the bad prefix. If you can do that, you're going to have an amazing item. At least you're going to have the starting points of an amazing item. So yeah, these changes to Veiled mods are significant, but they're not the smashing nerf that a lot of people think they are, and this will still be a widely sought after craft for a lot of items. Veiled Chaos Orbs can no longer be used to get multiple Veiled mods on an item. Previously, this was possible taking advantage of metacrafting mods or fractured mods. That's not going to affect most players, but there's a few specific shenanigans. And then there's a couple of things that affect some of the more powerful uses of stat stacking in conjunction with Veiled Chaos Orbs, which are again being nerfed. So there will only ever be that one ring that has I think there's a ring with, a synthesized ring with 6% or 7% after attribute catalyst, 7% strength and something like 200 points of strength on top of that, that it was posted to Reddit a while ago. That will be one of a kind. Okay, and then there's a host of other changes that are mentioned here. Not a huge amount that needs to be said here, except for one thing that I just really was surprised by. So Autobots have not been nerfed in any way that's been said yet. I am really shocked at seeing this, because I was thinking that if they're going after top-end power, which has been most of what they've been doing with this, with these changes, not going after Autobots seems really strange. I was sort of expecting to see some big changes there, and there doesn't appear to be anything. Lastly, Consecrated Ground is being changed so that it no longer applies a base critical strike chance debuff to enemies that are on it. So Consecrated Ground loses its offensive capability. Finally, there's a section on buffs to underperforming skills, and this one's interesting. Firestorm is getting a massive increase in the numbers. I don't know if they're enough. I don't think they are, but it certainly will be a hard-hitting skill. Whether it's a hard-hitting skill that is able to actually hit things, or whether it's a hard-hitting skill that hits the ground behind the enemy you are trying to hit very hard, is an open question. But I want to see how it works. It's 20% more damage, and then also having that significant increase from the first hit, from 350% base damage to 425%. That's basically a 46% increase, 46% more multiplier to that first impact. So that's pretty big. Some of the trap skills are getting changes, and I'm interested to see what they do with Seismic Trap here. I really want to test that out. I'm not sure that it will be good, but it looks kind of interesting. So let's talk quickly about, and also Split Arrow. Split Arrow and Soul Rend are getting numerical buffs. It might just be enough. One other thing that's changing here, two other things that are changing that need to be said, Golem changes. Golems as pet Autobots are dead, I believe. I could be wrong on this, but I believe that they've been gutted to the point that they're no longer incredible sort of minions that enhance your skills. They may still be very good as Golems as combat minions. In fact, I think Golems as combat minions will be a lot cheaper to League start, because you're not going to have a whole lot of people playing Elementalist for the Golems as pet Autobots. Raider is taking a pretty heavy nerf on the Onslaught side, but will probably still be worth taking that early. You'll just respec out of the Onslaught branch once you get yourself some of the +1 frenzy charges on gear type things, and all 3 frenzy charges from the passive tree. Once you reach that point, you're probably going to want to respec out of the Onslaught wing of the Raider, and take Avatar of the Veil, and I think it's Avatar of the Chase, the one that's the frenzy charge nodes. You'll want to take those 2 at endgame. Something that's flown a bit under the radar is that Abyss Jewels are losing Onslaught on kill. This has been a very powerful mechanic, and I think GG are right to say this is something that's just a massive action speed multiplier for top end players that doesn't come in until top end play. So boots with Onslaught are now much better than they were. Lastly, in terms of skill buffs, yeah, there's a few of them that are worth thinking of. As I already mentioned, Firestorm, Soul Rend, Split Arrow, and Seismic Trap are worth a look. But Spark is surprisingly getting a buff that I didn't really expect. Spark was one of the dominant skills in the aura stacking era, and it's still pretty good. So that's going to be interesting. It's looking like it could be something to keep in mind. Anyways, that's my thoughts on the Balanced Manifesto so far. If you've got any comments or questions, definitely fire away. Highly recommend having a look at this, start to finish, just reading the whole thing. And I will be watching the patch notes tomorrow. I will be streaming my first reactions to the patch notes over on Twitch, and then I'll be coming back here with a summary like I've done today. So definitely tune in for that. Otherwise, though, have fun, and may your Valorbs have interesting results.